It was a Tuesday in March, and I was standing in the pickup line at my son's school with a lukewarm Tim Hortons in one hand and my phone in the other, half reading an email from my dentist about a cleaning I'd been putting off for 6 months. Normal. Completely, unbearably normal. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moment your life falls apart. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. The woman next to me was someone I'd seen maybe a dozen times since September. We'd exchanged the usual pleasantries: weather, school fundraisers, which teacher was strict about late homework. Her name was Bonnie. She had a daughter in grade 2 and a son in grade 4, same as mine. She smiled at me the way she always did, warm and easy, and then she said something that made my coffee go cold in my hand. "Is your husband the tall one? Dark coat, drives the gray Highlander?" I said yes. I thought so. My daughter talks about him. He picks up that little girl, Maisie, almost every day. They live on our street. I didn't say anything for a moment. I think I nodded. I think I even smiled. And then the doors opened and the kids came pouring out, and I watched my son run toward me with his backpack, half unzipped and paint on his sleeve, and I hugged him and buckled him in and drove home on autopilot. And the whole time there was this sound in my head like when a TV channel goes to static. Just noise. Just white noise where my thoughts were supposed to be. My husband had been working on a rotation schedule in Fort McMurray for 4 years. 14 days on, 14 days off. That's how it had been since our son was barely walking. The oil sands. "Good money," he said. "We can save faster," he said. 2 more years and we'll have enough to buy something bigger, get out of the condo, give our son a real backyard. I believed him. I waited every 14 days like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because I loved him and because I was 31 years old and I thought I understood what marriage was. His name was Ray. And the little girl named Maisie, it turned out, was 3 years old. Do the math. I did it in the parking lot of a Shoppers Drug Mart on Dundas Street at 9:30 that night while my son slept in the back seat. I sat there with the engine running and I did the math on my phone's calculator like I was working out a grocery budget. 4 years ago, he left for Fort McMurray 4 years ago. If Maisie was 3, I put my phone face down on the passenger seat. Then I picked it up again. Then I put it down again. The thing is, I had never once questioned the rotation schedule. I'd seen his pay stubs. I'd video called him in what I assumed was a work camp trailer, bad lighting, that particular hum of industrial equipment in the background, a hard hat on the hook behind him. I had no reason to look closer. When you trust someone completely, you don't audit them. You just trust them. That's what trust means. We'd been together since university, met in second year, got married at 27, had our son at 28. I knew his parents, his childhood friends, the scar on his chin from a bike accident when he was 9. I knew that he cried at the end of Field of Dreams every single time, even when he pretended he wasn't crying. I knew him. Or I thought I did. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I went through every visit over the past 4 years, every phone call, every text. I thought about all the times he'd said the camp Wi-Fi was down. The times he'd seemed distracted when we talked. The Christmas 2 years ago when he said he couldn't make it home because of a shift extension, and I'd driven to his parents' house alone with our son and told everyone he sent his love. He sent his love from Fort McMurray. Except he wasn't in Fort McMurray, was he? I waited 3 days before I did anything. Not because I wasn't sure. I was sure in a way that settled into my chest like cement, but because I needed to think clearly, and I couldn't think clearly when I was shaking. I went to work, I picked up my son, I made dinner, I texted my husband the same things I always texted. "How was your day? We had pasta tonight. Your son says hi." He sent back the same things he always sent. Everything completely normal. And the whole time I was somewhere else entirely, in a place where the last 4 years were being re-examined frame by frame like a film reel I'd thought I already knew. On the 4th day, I called my older sister. She drove over from Mississauga that same evening and sat at my kitchen table with her coat still on and listened to everything I said without interrupting once. Then she was quiet for a long time. "Okay," she finally said. "Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to confront him on the phone. We're not going to do anything until you have something in writing." She was right. She's always right. She works in HR and she thinks in documentation. And at that moment, that was exactly the kind of thinking I needed. I hired a family lawyer the following Monday. I found her through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service. I just typed it into Google at 2 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table in my housecoat. Her name was Priscilla, and she had an office in downtown Hamilton, and she was the most calming human being I have ever encountered. She listened to everything I said, asked me a series of very precise questions, and then told me gently but clearly that what I was describing might constitute grounds for divorce, and that I should not move any money, change any accounts, or tip off my husband until we had a clearer picture. Document everything, she said. Dates, times, anything you can verify. I went home and I started a notes file on my phone. I wrote down Bonnie's name. I wrote down the street she'd mentioned. Not far from our son's school, not far from where we lived. I wrote down the date, the time, what she'd said word for word as best I could remember. Then, one evening while my son was at my sister's place, I drove to that street. It wasn't hard to find the gray Highlander. It was parked in the driveway of a semi-detached on a quiet residential street, just a few blocks from an elementary school. Yellow front door. A little bike on the porch, a red balance bike with streamers on the handlebars, the kind of bike a 3-year-old would ride. I didn't stop. I drove past once and then I drove home and I sat in my parking spot for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel. There's a particular feeling I don't have a word for. It's not just sadness and it's not just anger, it's something more like vertigo. Like the ground has shifted under you and you're walking around on terrain that used to be familiar and now you can't trust your footing anymore. That's what it felt like. That's what the next few weeks felt like. My husband's next scheduled trip home was in 9 days. I counted them. I didn't tell him anything. I went through our joint account, the one we'd had since we got married, the one we'd set up for shared expenses, mortgage, groceries, utilities, and I printed out 3 years of statements and brought them to Priscilla. She spread them across her desk and we looked at them together. What we found was this: for the past 4 years, direct deposits from his employer had come in like clockwork. Real deposits, real money, real paychecks. But the withdrawals were strange. Gas here and there. A grocery store, but not in Fort McMurray. Loblaws on Upper James. A coffee shop on Concession. A Cineplex charge in Hamilton. He'd been careful, mostly. He used his personal card for almost everything. The one I had no access to. But there were slips. Small ones. The kind you make when you're not paying attention. Or when you've been living a lie for long enough that you stop being careful. He's been local, Priscilla said, not a question. I nodded. Okay, she said, then we proceed. The week before he came home, I packed a bag for my son. I told him we were going to have a sleepover at Auntie's place, which was always a treat because my sister has a golden retriever named Biscuit, and my son would sleep in a barn if it meant spending time with that dog. He didn't ask much questions. Kids that age, they don't ask questions. They just grab their overnight bag and ask if Biscuit can sleep in their room. I told my husband I'd organized a babysitter so we could have a night to ourselves. He seemed genuinely happy about that. He texted me 3 heart emojis. He came home on a Friday. He walked through the door of our condo with his duffel bag over one shoulder and that familiar way he had of filling up a room. Tall and easy, smelling like cedar and whatever shampoo he used. And for just 1 second, just one involuntary second, something in me wanted to fold back into the person who didn't know what I knew. The person who still lived inside the life I thought I had. But the second passed. I made dinner. I opened a bottle of wine. I let him talk about work, the rotation, the guys, the cold up north in March. And I listened and nodded and said, and wow, and that sounds rough. And the whole time I was somewhere behind my own eyes, watching it happen like a film I already knew the ending to. After dinner, I cleared the plates and came back to the table and sat down across from him. I need to ask you something, I said. He looked up from his phone. Yeah? How long have you been home? He went very still. That's the thing about the truth. When it finally arrives, you don't need to explain it. I didn't say Bonnie's name. I didn't mention the street with the yellow door. I just asked the question, and the answer was already in his face before he said a single word. He tried several things in a row. He tried confusion first. What do you mean, home? I'm home right now. Then he tried a kind of hedging. I don't know what someone's told you. But then he stopped. And then he just looked at me for a long moment, and whatever he saw in my face must have told him that we were past the point where a story would help him. It was complicated, he said. The situation with, I didn't plan it. How long? I said again. He rubbed his face with both hands. 3.5 years. 3.5 years. Our son had just turned 5 when Ray had started quietly building a second life 40 minutes from our front door. Our son was almost 9 now. I want to tell you, I screamed. I want to tell you I threw something, turned over the table, did something proportionate to what I was feeling. But I didn't. I just sat there. I think I was somewhere past screaming. I think I was in the part that comes after shock, where everything goes very quiet and very clear. Where does she think you go? I said, when you come here. He didn't answer right away. She thinks I'm in Fort McMurray. Of course she did, because he told her the same story he told me. The rotation, 14 on, 14 off. Good money, save faster, 2 more years. He'd built the same architecture of absence around both of us and moved between us like a man who didn't have to answer to anyone. I asked him about Maisie. He closed his eyes. Yes, he said, she's mine. I nodded. I'd already known, but having him say it out loud was something different. It landed somewhere specific. I told him to sleep on the couch. The next morning I called Priscilla, and then I called my sister, and then I made my son's favorite breakfast. Blueberry pancakes with maple syrup, the real kind from the farmer's market. And I drove to her place and I sat on her kitchen floor with Biscuit's head in my lap, while my son ran around the backyard in his socks, and my sister made coffee and nobody said anything for a while, which was exactly what I needed. The legal process took time. Of course it did. This is Ontario, not a movie. Things don't resolve in a montage. We had to establish separation, document assets, figure out the custody arrangement. Our son's life was the thing I cared about most. Whatever happened between Ray and me was between Ray and me, but my son hadn't done anything wrong, and I was not going to let him become collateral damage in someone else's choices. Ray agreed to everything. I think the guilt made him agree to everything. Full financial disclosure, which is legally required anyway under the Family Law Act, so it wasn't like he had a choice. And it turned out the numbers on his personal card told a clear story. Groceries, daycare fees, IKEA, Home Depot, Netflix. 4 years of building a household. He'd been splitting his paycheck between 2 lives, and the life with me had gotten the smaller share. The joint account sat nearly untouched. He'd contributed to it, technically, but spent almost nothing from it. It shows you've said that was actually useful. It shows you've been managing independently, Priscilla said. That's relevant. I didn't find out much about the other woman. I didn't want to. She wasn't the villain in my story. She'd been lied to, too, in a different way, and whatever she was dealing with now was her own situation to manage. I heard through Ray, when we spoke practically about logistics, that she had found out around the same time as me, that she had not, apparently, taken it well. I couldn't blame her. There's a moment, maybe 4 months into all of this, when I was standing in the checkout line at the Fortinos near my new apartment. I'd moved. By then, my son and I had gotten a place in a walkable neighborhood in the West End, and I realized I was fine. Not fine like everything was good and nothing had happened, but fine like I was upright and functional, and I'd just chosen a very nice bunch of kale without thinking about any of it. Just a regular Tuesday in July. My son's backpack hanging by the front door. Biscuit visiting every other weekend because my sister drove him over. Blueberry pancakes on Sunday mornings. The condo sold in May. We split the equity. Ray's lawyer and my lawyer talked to each other so that Ray and I didn't have to, which was the part of the legal system I was most grateful for. My share of the equity, combined with what I'd quietly built in savings over 4 years of living mostly on my own income, while the joint account sat untouched. It was enough. Enough for a down payment on something small but mine. Enough to stop calculating and start breathing. My son asks about his dad sometimes in the way that 8-year-olds ask about hard things. Obliquely, sideways, like he's testing the temperature of the water before he steps in. One night he came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and stood next to me for a while without saying anything. And then he said, "Is it true Dad lives somewhere else now?" "Yes," I said. "He has his own place? Does he still love me?" I turned off the tap. I dried my hands. I crouched down so I was at his level and I looked at him and I said, "Yes, absolutely yes. That part doesn't change." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to whatever he was doing. Kids have this ability to take in one piece of information at a time, file it, and move on. I envied it some days. What I know now, a year and a bit on from that Tuesday in the school pickup line, is this. I did not fall apart. I wanted to. There were nights in the first month when I sat on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning because the bed was too much to deal with, and I cried in that specific way, where you can't make any sound because your kid is asleep down the hall. I did that. I'm not pretending I didn't. But I also made the calls I needed to make, found the lawyer I needed to find, drove past a yellow front door and let myself see the truth. And I did not wait for someone to rescue me from it. I also sent Bonnie a thank you card. A real one from the paper shop on King Street. I didn't explain why. I just wrote that she'd been a kind person to me at a moment I hadn't expected, and that I was grateful. She texted me a few weeks later. She'd seen me at the school and wanted to check in. We met for coffee. We're friends now, the kind of quiet, reliable friends you make in your 30s who you didn't plan on and who turn out to be exactly the ones you need. My son got a real backyard this fall, small, south-facing, with a fence that the previous owners had painted a cheerful shade of green. He dragged me outside the afternoon we moved in and showed me exactly where he wanted to put a hockey net, very serious about the angles, the way he always is when something matters to him. I stood there in the October light with my coffee and watched him pace it out, and I thought, this is the life. Not the one I thought I was building, but the one I actually have. And it's enough. More than enough. It's mine.